Gene, as we dive in, I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit on your perspective of the human machine collaboration access and how that's evolved since your early days.
AI to me has four distinctive chapters to it. The first one is what everyone knows and loves, is what I call a system of engagement. That's your chatbots. Like, that stuff is the beginnings of that human machine collaboration that we'll talk about today. Second chapter is more traditional, where I call it sort of the machine learning area. This is where the technologies ingest information, kind of transform it, understand it, and spit out interpretations of it. The third one is an offshoot of that, which is reasoning. It makes it feel sentient. It makes it feel alive. So the reasoning capabilities are making it feel human-like. The last one is simple word automation. Things that automatically get done without our intervention. Things that happen that are now advancing so quickly. We know how to set the VCR and coffee maker. That doesn't make us uncomfortable. But what happens when the system or computer or phone knows that Emily wants to buy a blue shirt? Well, how the heck did they know that Emily wants to buy a blue shirt when all she did was mention it to her cousin a week ago? Those automation threads are so advancing now. Again, it kind of feeds the whole loop, and it's all underpinned by data and informatics, right? So none of this stuff works without information and relevant information.
Hello, humans. You're here for the weekly VineDown. I'm Emily Smith. I'm joined this week by Gene Chao. I am super pumped to have Gene because here's why, audience. We do a lot of hearing from ourselves here in higher education. I'm bringing you a real deal, live, in person, captive AI expert, Gene Chao. And Gene is the founder and CEO of GenReventures, dealing a lot in digital transformation and sort of the future of work. Gene also has really been a leader in the emerging tech space over the last 15 years. He created a business unit for IBM, who had their hands deep within creation of Watson, which is, if you don't know, what IBM created in order to sort of leverage an AI for consulting work. So a real deal from outside of higher ed expert who's done a lot of thinking about emerging tech. And Gene, thanks so much for being with us today.
No, thank you, Emily. I'm so excited to be here and happy to riff on so many ideas and use cases and storylines for you. The last handful of years, let's call it 2-3 years, has really been that upward curve of acceleration. And I think we're all at a pivotal time. Super exciting. We talk about things like chapters. We're at what I'll call an epic time. So fundamental pivot point. So thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay, Gene, my first question for you is, when are we going to ski together, talk about AI? I have this vision of us on the ski lift. We're riding up, talking about AI and emerging tech, skiing down, thinking, and then doing it again. I'm curious when we can make that happen in the Colorado Rockies.
Let's do that ASAP. And I don't know if you know, so my younger two both go to Colorado Boulder. And my wife and I have been debating something in the Rocky Mountains literally for 2-3 years now. So we're there all the time. We're spending Thanksgiving there. Let's schedule it up. I'm in.
Awesome. Okay, I'm super excited about this. I want GenReventures to have an adventure with me on the slopes. I'm excited about that. So, Gene, as we dive in, I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit on your perspective of the sort of human-machine collaboration access and how that's evolved since your early days. Because I think we think in higher ed, we're like, AI is brand new. And you're like, yeah, welcome to the party. We've been at this party for quite some time. So how has that changed in those intervening years? And what assumptions are you sort of unlearning at this point?
No, it's an unbelievably relevant question, and it's interesting. I do a lot of conversation threads and design thinking around defining the phrase AI. And it's interesting when I run client workshops. I have 3 kids who are basically grown now, but when they were young, I always talk about the proverbial bad word jar, the cuss word jar at the dinner table. You say a cuss word, you throw a quarter in. There are words in the technology taxonomy now that they're not inherently bad words. They're just so fudgy and ill-defined that they mean so many different things to so many different people. It's hard to put your finger on what it is. AI is certainly one of them. Cloud, transformation, automation, those mean different things to different people. So what I tend to do is, the first thing is, let's set the table, right? The table is, AI to me has 4 distinctive chapters to it. The first one is what everyone knows and loves is what I call a system of engagement. That's your chatbots. That's your Siri voice activated stuff in your car. Like that stuff is the beginnings of that human machine collaboration that we'll talk about today. Second chapter is more traditional, where I call it sort of the machine learning area. This is where the technologies ingest information, kind of transform it, understand it, and spit out interpretations of it. The third one is an offshoot of that, which is reasoning. This is where we're really standing in the center of change right now, because reasoning makes AI, chatbots, technologies feel, and here's a fancy word for you, it makes it feel sentient. It makes it feel alive. How many news articles or different podcasts we see that says, okay, that person asked the question, wait a minute, is that a human being or is that technology? It's getting blended now. So the reasoning capabilities are making it feel human-like, which we'll talk about more. The last one is what simple word automation. Things that automatically get done without our intervention. Things that happen that are now advancing so quickly. Yeah, we know how to set the VCR and coffee maker. That doesn't make us uncomfortable. But what happens when the system or computer or phone knows that Emily wants to buy a blue shirt? Well, how the heck did they know that Emily wants to buy a blue shirt when all she did was mention it to her cousin, a week ago? Those automation threads are so advancing now. Again, it kind of feeds the whole loop. And it's all underpinned by data and informatics, right? So none of this stuff works without information and relevant information. So I wanted to spend just a minute on that to say, okay, let's unpack the term AI first.
Mhm.
Now, having said that, I'm a kind of a concept guy. Let me give you the pivotal moment that we're in. Regardless of industry or sector or education or any of this stuff, we've all grown up, our generation, in what they call the people, process, technology trifecta. People following processes supported by technology. That is completely dead now. The design principles of almost everything going forward is the same three stop points, but it's now technologies running processes supported by people. Just that statement change is a very big pivotal moment for us, where, if you think about your audience in terms of class registration, managing student body activities, curriculum development, different training and education accreditation, for example, very rarely are those things only done by human beings. Now you have algorithms creating these platforms of education. That's an uncomfortable spot to be in for an administrator or an educator that says, here's my lesson plan, here's my study guide, here's my curriculum. But if you don't have technology alongside you now, you're moving too slow.
Mhm.
You're irrelevant in terms of what you're teaching kids to graduate with. And ultimately, just the engagement model is fundamentally different. So, long-winded way to say, where are we today? Where are we is, where does technology lead? Where does it follow? And where is what I'll call the workflow design, meaning the people, process, technology shift? How does that fundamentally change how we do things day to day? So that's kind of the center point of where we are today. Yesterday's news: information entry, data extraction, codifying things. How do I turn a calendar into a digital one on my iPhone? How do I make restaurant reservations without calling? That's old tech. New tech is real interaction. New tech is the quote unquote sentient or alive technology that is coupled with us as a partner in life. So let me pause there. I said a mouthful.
Well, I loved what you said. I also would like to acknowledge that if we had a bad word jar at my house, it would be like consistently overflowing, because when we talk about defining terms, it's a term you don't need to define: the F word. So I'm glad that you're defining. I'm glad that you're defining AI in some of those terms. And I think what you're talking about will strike some of the audience, because most of the folks listening are listening from like the college and university side. And I think what I would be hearing on that side is like people who are still fighting fights with data, governance, some of the data entry. And you're like, yeah, that's yesterday's news, and you're blowing right past it. And I know that you have done some thinking about the sort of the difference between like getting ready for AI, meaning you'll need some clean IA. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, because from the school side, this like data governance is still just like a big, juicy topic. So how do people get ready for this future of work?
Well, so you bring up an interesting one that has a very interesting study out there, or what I'll call use case instead of study. So
Mhm.
just so everyone understands what you've gleaned from what I'm talking about. So what I always say is AI does not work without IA. What the heck does that mean? Artificial intelligence does not work without the information architecture. AI is essentially a dummy until we train it, right? It's just like our education system. Like, you can't become a medical doctor without going through a series of knowledge training, a series of experiences.
Mhm.
We're in the middle of learning how to teach AI to do things. Now, the first sort of big generation that's widely adopted, and everybody knows ChatGPT. And everybody knows the whole phrase around large language models. Let me interpret that for you guys. Let me translate that. That is public domain information, and that is unscrubbed, generally unstructured, and no one's kind of validated good, bad, or indifference on that. And I'll give you a funny story that I heard, and this is an IBM executive that told this story at a sales kickoff, which I've now stolen as my own. But if anyone's ever seen that movie, Men in Black,
Mhm.
so Tommy Lee Jones is the actor in that plays one of the agents. He has a phrase that I love in there, and I hope this doesn't offend people, but his phrase is exactly right, which is, a person is smart, people are dumb. It doesn't mean everyone, like, it's not dummies, right? It's just that once you get a cohort, once that cohort becomes really big, information starts to erode. Quality of that information is questionable, and you don't know what's BS or not, right?
Mhm.
So take that concept into what you're asking for. So how have we, how are we arriving with these chat GPTs of the world? We think they're smart, but they're not. They're using public domain information. And sometimes it's really cool because you want to write a paragraph about the New York Knicks win yesterday, something like that. Okay, it'll kind of create a creative thing. But let me tell you the use case or the case study that I mentioned. So there was an attorney, and I know this one I know who it is, but I can't mention it. A major law firm attorney associate that wrote a legal document, predominantly on ChatGPT technology. They had what they called AI hallucination on the large language model, and it invented legacy law cases to support its returning thesis on the lawsuit.
Just invented them out of thin air.
Just invented it out of thin air because no one's instructed ChatGPT to give a purely factual accounting of this law motion. So what it did is it took the boundaries, which are kind of undefined, and it created a story. No one said tell a truthful story. It just said tell a story about this law motion. So this attorney, not yet partner, associate, took it to court. So they're like, we never heard of these things. They've learned over the discovery process it was completely fabricated by ChatGPT. So, like, don't put all your trust into that large language model yet. It's cool, it's interesting, and it can return very good things if you give it the right foundational rules and boundaries. This is why now you'll see what they call small language models, or they get into very specific domain knowledge areas, which AI works really, really well. AI, and I'll tell you another fun story outside of education, but there's a wonderful company called Mondelez. Everybody knows Mondelez. You just don't know that you know them. They make Oreo cookies.
I was going to say, I know Mondelez.
They have AI algorithms, and Oreo cookies. They have the orange color ones for Halloween. They have thins, double stuff. They have strawberry flavor ones. Well, there's not a human being sitting there pulling a lever saying double stuff is double the amount of filling. They use AI algorithms to do the materials management for cookie development. Like, those things are very small models. They're very finite in terms of their rules, and it works awesome. But once you say, write me a law review on these general topics, yeah, the quality of information may not be there yet. What you'll see these major systems working on is a phrase called AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. That is not there yet. That's not there. Small domain area expertise is. So just be careful when you think about adoption or entrance into those areas. So if you're writing a chatbot or a study guide or a bursar type of assistant within the domain of a school system, yeah, you can make that work really, really well. It's very cool, feels sentient. Um, but once you say, hey, tell me about the entire US population student body in their second year of colleges, yeah, nah, not so good.
Right. So the broader sort of the broader, the more hallucination. And I think we think about that a lot in terms of like the AI agents we've created for recruitment and advising, particularly because it's like a contained skill set. But I think about sort of like then the human skill and the evolution of work, because I think a lot of folks, especially on the college side, are sort of worried about like, well, if we can agentify my interaction with a student, whether it's on the admission side or on the advising side, like what good am I? And I think there's this like human resistance to like, is it coming to take our jobs? And I think the sort of the logical conclusion is like, no, it's actually going to level you up. So instead of writing the communications, you are reviewing the drafts. Instead of writing the admissions reports, you are, reviewing them for accuracy and presenting them well. And I'm curious if you can talk about sort of some of those like additional deep dive into that, like the unexpected human skills that have become more valuable in this future of work.
Sure. There's an interesting set of trends happening. I'll start with the broadest one. I call it the extrovert, introvert, extrovert shift. Just the general dynamics of technology have put, at a large, broad brushstroke, human beings, especially the younger generations, into an introverted model. And we see this, right? I look at my own kids. They come home and they're buried in their iPhone or buried on TikTok or whatever they use now. And it's interesting. I literally watch my older guy and my younger guy sit at the dinner table 5 feet from each other, texting each other. I'm like, wait. I'm like, what? First we, as the parents in the room, like, stop texting your friends. They're like, we're not. I'm like, but I hear the dings going off. Oh no, I'm texting him. I'm like, he's 3 feet away from you. so so the introversion is very, and I won't even get into the whole idea of the dopamine and the
Sure.
emotional attachments, all this stuff. That's negative as well. But that extroverted, introverted, extroverted dynamic, it's changing back to the extroversion. And it's interesting because what I'm watching now are new grads, what we call freshers, making a very specific ask when we make either internships or job awards. We're giving them offer letters. They want to be tethered to an office now. The work from home, the remote, they're like, no, no, we recognize that we have to learn how to build relationships. We recognize that the human interaction is critical, not only for today, but going forward. I am so pleased to watch it swing back to that quote unquote extroversion. That doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. It's just that now it's more community based. The communication gaps are now closing instead of widening. So that human skill set is, funny enough, it has to be relearned, right? Just watching the younger generations come through, they're very bright, but their writing skills have eroded, their communication skills have eroded, and they could be the smartest individuals on the planet, but if they can't communicate what they're thinking, they're going to have a heck of a time when they leave their education system. So that's a very big number one for me. The number two, which is a little bit more positive and optimistic, is there's a very big motion over the last 2 to 3 years on what I call unrestricted thinking. So, my old boss, Ginny Rometty, she did something that I applaud to this very day. She still works on it. She avoided the whole white collar, blue collar thing. She called something new collar. And what that really meant to her is what's more important than the level of degrees or number of degrees you had were the experiences, skills that you developed along the way. That around unrestricted thinking is the most powerful motion, Emily, that I see going on, because yes, you can be a classically trained engineer, mechanical engineer, but if you can't think outside the box of the engineering realm, you're actually less valuable than someone that can come in and say, I have a different perspective. Have we tried this? That quote unquote R&D or teasing out of different ideas is now reemerging through that unrestricted thinking. Think about what happened, what is it, a decade or two ago now. You have what they call Uberization or the Airbnb model. If I said to you when we were, young, get out of high school into college, I said, Emily, I'm going to create a real estate empire, but I'm not going to own a single square foot of real estate. You'd look at me like I was on some sort of drug. Even better, I'm going to create a car service company, but won't
No
own a single
cars.
vehicle. Like, what the hell are you talking about? That quote unquote Uberization has translated into so many things. I do credit Amazon with that, right? They have an online store with no inventory. So outside the box thinking, unrestricted thinking, the willingness to crowdsource things, that's part of that extroversion thing that I talked about. It also tears down the barriers of how you think through your problem solving skills. I did a speaking engagement with my son's university, Denison University out of Ohio. And they created at the time, it was a number of years ago, a new data and analytics major, which now, by the way, I see popping all over the place. And they, not only Denison, but other university systems, I've talked to Carnegie Mellon and UC Davis and others, they've created a data and analytics curriculum that has finite boundaries and then the adjacencies around it. So they're pressing forward with unrestricted thinking. They're pressing forward with the extroversion, quote unquote, aspects of it. Human skills, those are the two biggest areas that I see. Forget about emerging. They're here. We got to keep lighting a fire under that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's such a good way for colleges, and I hope colleges, the college side folks who are here are thinking about the ways in which we can create, like, a better product for students because, right, if we keep sort of jamming down the throats of sort of America's youth, like, here are the ways that um here are the ways that we train you, here are the ways that we get you ready for the world, we're gonna let them down unless we adopt these new ways of thinking. And aside from the skills then, like, then what is the right way of thinking about, like, sort of the psychological contract between organizations and employees, and, like, how does that then evolve in the sort of human machine workplace where we're, like, working alongside of AI in this way?
Yeah, there's to me what you're describing is there's a major and a minor, right? The major is the technology piece because this it's the center of our conversation today. But the secondary or minor piece is a collaboration environment that is rewarded. There are so many, and I'm talking about this from a business or an enterprise lens, right? People have their job descriptions. People know how they make money, how they get promoted, how they're recognized or awarded in the workplace. The the structures that are in place largely right now, especially in tech companies, have created very firm walls between teammates, project coordinators, different resource pools. People are unwilling to share and collaborate because they don't know if they'll get credit for it, or oh, my bonus will go to somebody else. So we have to fundamentally reinvent the reward mechanism and how collaboration happens. Some of the biggest technology companies, I know Apple does it, Google does it, Amazon, I think, has started to do it. They encourage what they call individual productive time. So they're getting rewarded for things. Don't work on your quote unquote day job. You can spend 10 hours a month, or whatever the number is. You can go work on whatever project you want in the company. Just, land yourself in the right realms. I love that model because that fosters that unrestricted thinking aspect of it. So collaboration, tear down the fear walls of going outside of your job description or your little pod. That's going to make a monster's worth of difference. People used to call that cross training. I don't know what happened to that. It's interesting. And my daughter's a senior in college now. The trend amongst her generation where she is dual majors now, but like broadly spoken, like art and science dual majors, not like
Mhm.
I'm going to be a technical accountant, I'll be an economist. They are actually picking two wildly, seemingly out of balance things, but they actually complement each other. So like I see, and I've talked to her friends, there are folks that are in computer sciences and art and design majors. I'm like, well, how does that work? They're like, well, we committed to 5 years of school. We're getting lots of activity on what they call UI UX, user experience, user interaction. They love these art science dual majors now, and so these kids are collaborating on their own. So, and part of that, and sorry for the long-winded answer again, but to answer the major part of your question is, how do we work alongside the emerging tech? How does the AI componentry happen? Well, if you can blend your art and science, the science part of it will likely bring along technology. Everything is a technology-oriented environment now. I don't care if you're a medical student, a law student, if you're in sort of hardcore finance. There are aspects of systems, data, algorithms that you bring to the table. So in the education system, it has to be there. In the work environment, what's the first thing they give you when you arrive? Here's your laptop.
A computer.
Right? And by the way, that's changed, because when's the last time you saw anybody get a phone number assigned to them at work? Now you have Teams and you have all these things. They don't even reimburse kids for their cell phones anymore, because you have a collaboration tool called Teams or Zoom or whatever. Like, you have to be technology conversant. You have to be. Otherwise, you're not going to be effective.
Well, you're not going to be effective, and you're also going to lose, even if you're like a hardcore like people person in a people-facing role. If you can't accommodate this new technology, I think about this with particularly with admissions folks and student advisors who are advising current students. Like, yes, you got into that work because you have a deep connection to people and a deep desire to help people and build relationships that feel transformational. Like, sure, but you're going to be ineffective in that unless you can adopt new technology that will give you like system informed, data informed ways of operating to do that at scale. Because otherwise, you're just going to be limited to like, how many relationships could you keep in your head at one time? Like 40? Okay, fine. You're a super successful advisor of 40 students. Like, that's not enough. And there are better tools to make that caseload feel way bigger, but just as transformational and effective.
Yep, for sure. There's one of the other, you'll learn about me. I love my sort of, kitschy motions and descriptions, but the big change, and we talked about early on, the shift or the rebalance of this technology environment, right? It used to be very centralized. So you used to have to bring the work to the technology. That was mainframe computers, data center, and like all the,
On-prem, yeah.
yeah, on-prem stuff. But now you are bringing the technology to the work. You can be anywhere. You can be remote. You can be, all the remote learning. You can work in a iron ore mine, and you'd have all the technology in the world, right? Like, all the work is going distributed. So it's just the tool belt now, right?
That's right.
But don't think about it as only a tool belt. It's almost an appendage. It's a limb rather than a tool belt. And everyone has to have these extra limbs now. It's a very interesting dynamic.
I think you're right. And I'm curious, like, I think we on the college side also are sort of slower to adopt change because it's, these systems are very complex. We have, when we think about the student journey from a prospective student through a current student to an alum of an institution, those students interact with so many different parts and pieces of the administration layer of a college. We also know that colleges are closing, right? They're not staying financially solvent. And it's not because of the expense of the campus. It's not because of the expense of the teaching and learning. That stuff is cheap. It's the administration level layer, which is super expensive. And I'm curious, as people are hearing you talk about like this is sort of a foregone conclusion, this is an appendage you have to adopt. I'm also curious if you can talk a little bit about sort of patterns that you've observed in making the implementation of new technology or the implementation of AI tools successful versus failed, and where do you see us not talking about that enough? Because I think a lot of people are like, okay, fine, Gene, like I'm drinking your Kool-Aid, I'll implement the new technology, but where am I going to fall down on the job? Can you talk a little bit about how we can keep these things successful or where we might fail?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let me answer by what I'll say two focus areas that I find are missing. Let me take that back. I wouldn't say missing. I would think they're a second or afterthought, after the technology widget or technology component. The two words I'll use, one is data, and the other one is process. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about each. Let me start with the process. There are very inexpensive tools and systems today called process mining. And what that happens is, for example, you can literally have a student you can even start with the application process. You can follow an individual through their journey of their education life. It's literally, the process mine is it digitally renders what's happening over that student, like everything from, hey, we're going to start capturing, and they submit their SAT and ACT scores, to how many general applications are sent into the system by what state university. You can literally track and depict and digitally render the quote unquote life cycle of a student.
Mhm.
Why that does not exist today across the board is baffling to me because it's done super, super well, cheaply, and very with high quality in financial markets. You could literally follow Emily Smith's investment dollar from the second it leaves your bank account till when you return something on that investment. Why are we not treating that data package, i.e., the student, in the same way?
Right.
It baffles me that we don't have a process mining engine for education systems that follows the life of a student, their application, their education journey, what classes they've enrolled with, how successful they are in that, what are they signing up for from an activity standpoint, are they an NCAA athlete, and how does that change their curriculum? Like, there's so many information areas that are at your fingertips, your audience's fingertips. I'm baffled why people aren't raising their hand saying, I would like insight into that, because now I can curate a different way of educating my student body if needed. Maybe it'll tell you you do it fantastically, right? Now apply that to the administrator. Think about following the revenue dollar inside of a university or education. Same thing, process
Right.
mining and data mining of all that. So process orientation I find is missing. Um, Data is getting better, but what I find fascinating is the fancy phrase is data residency. We don't know in the education and university systems where data actually resides. Why? Because there's still a lot of things that are handwritten. There are still a lot of things that are on someone's laptop or,
On a post-it note.
Post-it notes, but there's a way now they're digitizing these things. So how do you actually create data pools or data puddles as they call them? So, that creates collaboration sites, that creates a different type of virtual classroom. All of these things, Emily, have been years into the adoption into the business enterprise.
Yes.
We need to flow that into what I think is a more important sector, which is educating our students, our people in our country. It's baffling. I don't know why they're late adopters there.
Well, I would actually hazard a guess or to diagnose it with you on the process mining and the data residency piece is like if I'm hearing you and I'm sort of putting myself in the shoes of any number of the institutional CIOs that I've worked with over the years, the question is going to be like, okay, what do we do with that once we know it, right? Like if you were able to track the student journey in that way, then the really scary outcome is that then you have to look at your course offerings, your degree programs, the way you treat students, the way you recruit students, and say like, okay, we're learning something new. We need to change these products. We need to change these systems, the way we engage with students, the way we treat students. And that is biting off a lot to chew. And if you zoom out in that way, like how would an institutional CIO who's listening, it's like, okay, yeah, I believe you. We need to get clear about data mining or process mining and data residency. Like, and then what do we go do with it and have it not feel completely overwhelming?
Yeah, and look, it happens in business every day, right? You have to create an internal economy, right? So whatever university system that you're in, you have either a student economy, an administration economy, and when I say economy, I mean it from a micro perspective, right? And the silly analogy I'll give you, and my younger two are at Colorado Boulder. We talked about that
Mhm.
earlier. And how the heck did they know when Coach Deion Sanders, Coach Primetime showed up? How many sweatshirts did they order in the school store? They got it right, right? There was no wasted inventory. So they can create a Coach Prime economy for the starter sweatshirt. But you're telling me you are hesitant to create a student economy for your economics curriculum? You're hesitant to create a student economy for your arts and sciences school? It should be not only more important, but it should be as easy to figure out how many hot dogs does the stadium have on Saturday. Like that student economy, it's right there. It's not difficult. You just got to do it.
Well, you're asking a person at a school who like is really influenced by like the ivy walls and the ways that colleges are like exist in the communities to educate. And then you're turning to like two business examples. How many sweatshirts? How many hot dogs? And those are like corporate, hardcore business examples and things we do in business all the time. And we do it easily. But somehow our mindset like breaks a little bit when we think about those things in terms of education and in terms of the institution, like capital I institution of higher ed. But what I'm hearing you say, the takeaway is like, okay, like it's not so bad to act like a business in this way.
And again, my analogy, I hear you, and I'm aligned with you. Let's make it a little personal for a second, right? So, you and I and everyone on your listeners probably run some sort of household. Whether you rent or own doesn't matter. There's a difference between creating a home and running a house, right? So why can't they coexist? I have 3 kids. I live in Westchester County, north of New York City, and I have to have a fairly tight budget. So my household running, my operations, if you will, business operations,
Right.
has to be fairly tight as far as the Chow economy is concerned. But my wife and I have to create a loving home for 3 kids and 2 dogs. Now, I want to make sure they have all the learning opportunities that they can get. I want to make sure that they feel loved. I want to make sure that there's a value system that they subscribe to. Why are the university systems not adopting that true same thing, same way you and I run our households?
Right.
And again, I don't mean to be, I don't want to poke the bear in an unfair way, right? But I'm just saying this. That's that unstructured thinking that I talked about. Is take other use case examples and find the best of breed for whatever your situation is. Look, I understand that a small public technical college has to behave differently than Harvard University. I get it. That doesn't mean there can't be microeconomies that are different in each of those areas that have both a value system and a management system for your house, if you will. So, like those sort of principles, I can't profess that I'm knowledgeable in it, or that's just I'm telling you from someone who's paid tuitions, continues to pay tuitions, watch my kids go through the education systems. Last story I'll tell you, 3 kids, 2 boys, girl in the middle. When my oldest one was coming through, we had a debate: public school or private school. That's if you come to Upper Westchester, New York City, the whole debate is public school, private school, and we did a little bit of both. And I'll tell you that all in all, the experience, dollar for dollar, while more expensive, in the value system and the education and the economics, for me, was much better in a private school system for my 3 kids. But if you look at it on a spreadsheet, and this is your point about a business lens,
Mhm.
Gene, you're crazy. You're paying 4x versus just your property taxes in public school. But I created a value system around it. And I created the opportunity system around it. They all got to university systems that we love. They live family values that we wanted to have. The community involvement was there. Even things down to sports participation and clubs. Like we had to look at a holistic value system rather than just a quote unquote business lens. I think that should carry through to higher ed.
Yeah, you're right. To look at it in a multifaceted way to understand, like, bringing along sort of house and household, I think are the right ways to think about it, because what is a college if not a community in that same way, right? Like the business has to run and it has to feel pretty good to the people inside of the community or inside of the economy, as you say.
Absolutely. Look, and look, I don't mean to be simple-minded about it, right? Look, one size does not fit all in any education system. So you go to a big, state university like a Colorado or Penn State or any of that stuff, and your investments and your model for your business student has to be different than your fine arts student. So somebody's created a system around that already.
Sure.
Why not quote unquote digitize that system so you know exactly what levers to pull and when? So when your school is looking at the economics of the actual institution, you have your widgets in place that says, I have a fine arts economy and I have a business school economy. And this is the value system that sits on top of that. Like, I think that's good work that should be done.
Well, and implicit in that, just to make sure that doesn't sound like overly simple as you roll it out, is like the testing and measuring and making decisions about, like, how do we know it's working to be able to diagnose, run more of what works, throw away what isn't working.
Absolutely. And it sounds funny, but artificial intelligence gives you the data sets and gives you the lens into those economies and how you scale those economies. The big debate right now is people are no longer afraid of AI. What they're afraid of is what they call AC, artificial control. That doesn't mean the university and education systems and the administrators don't necessarily automatically give away the control of your university, but create the intelligence, create the data fabric that allows you to create control mechanisms. You can keep them or you can automate them. or you can have a whole different sort of management system around it. It is essentially welcoming the education sector into what they call digital transformation. Digital transformation, yesterday's news was a better piece of software or a better email system or a better network because you want to send files quicker. Okay, great. But those are what I'll call utilities today. You go home, you turn the lights on, you expect the lights to go on. You go into a school system and those things, you expect that to be there. It's a utility. But now you have the innovation piece of it. It's here, it's getting less and less expensive, but it requires a very mindful thought process, a blueprint to go do those things. Lean on the business colleagues out there. I tell you, and I'll highlight IBM. IBM has two really, really good relationships. One with Michigan State, out up in East Lansing, and the other one with Louisiana State down in Baton Rouge. There are development centers that we had put in, literally tens of thousands of people from business students, computer science students, to our interns, to newly acquired talent. They're development centers. They are co-created with the university systems because we were able to strike an alliance with the education administrators. That should happen in every school. It's
Sure.
not just about hire my new grad. It's about how do I actually create a fabric together that brings that appendage, that technology appendage to bear, regardless of the program that you're in. I think we're on the precipice of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Gene, gosh, like you're leaving. I can feel it. The audience is like so hungry to like burst out of their offices and just change a bunch of stuff right now. So I'm very eager to hear audience feedback after this episode because I'm 100% sure that I'm gonna hear from folks who are like, I listened to Gene and here's what I went and blew up. So I'm very excited about that. And Gene, the very last question that I want to ask you, it's a tricky one. What is the best piece of advice you've gotten lately?
Oh, I'm going to say it, but I was going to say it lightly, but I want to say it bluntly. I think it's an interesting one. Is um, just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean you don't like them. And I bring and said and the advice was be mindful of that because I, like a lot of my friends, got caught up in this whole election year politic environment. And you know what? I found a very close group of friends that we've known each other literally since elementary school, and I'm in my mid-50s now, right? There are 2, 3, 4 of them that literally don't talk to each other now after 50 years of friendship because they had differing political opinions or they thought, this or that. Just because you disagree doesn't mean you dislike. That to me helps me reset every day. It says, okay, Emily and Gene could not agree on something, but that doesn't mean I like you any less. And today, for some odd reason, and lots of people blame social media. Some other people just blame the hostile environments. That back to that introversion to extroversion thing. I think it's shifting, but just active listening, having an understanding, agree to disagree. Just because you disagree doesn't mean you dislike. That's the best piece of advice I've heard in years, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think, like all things, right? We're like curating the content and the people that we're around, the messages that we receive. And I find this especially in my consumption of like, things on Instagram. And I actually a couple months ago, for this reason, went and followed a bunch of like working women and moms who think really differently than I do to get exposed to that way of thinking and could find like, oh wow, these are women who are smart. These are women who I respect. These are women who I deeply disagree with. But it's been really interesting to me to have that experience of consuming things that feel really different from what I believe and still have that sort of like, but you're smart, you seem reasonable. And I think that's a really lovely piece of information as we head into a new year, certainly with a lot of tensions that are rising and have risen. So Gene, thank you so much for that lovely piece of advice. I love it. I'm going to carry it forward.
I appreciate that, and so much fun, and hope we get to do more of this stuff.
On the slopes next time, Gene, you and me. Well,
You
folks,
got it.
thanks for another great Vine Down. Gene, I appreciate your time. Audience, we'll see you next time.